supposed to be there at 10. John called. Okay, where are you, Kathy? I said, I blamed it all on Debbie. Oh, Debbie's not here yet. Anyway, we took off at 10. We got there at about 10:30. Started through Avondale. Neatest little, 10:30 in the morning.
In the morning?
You know me, that's right. Yes, the sun does not come up for me until 10. I did great to get there. But anyway, we were walking, and it was really easy because when Dorian and I did it for whoever the other, Mark Sanford, when we were doing it, we had to talk to everybody. And you can imagine me, you know, and it was grueling because it took hours and hours. This was just put the little thing under the mat or in the door or whatever. Well, then Debbie and I got lost because we left the car and then we were walking all around and Debbie said, well, take your phone now. So I did this and I said, oh, there we are. Well, there was no sign on the road, so we didn't know exactly where we were. We walk on and Debbie sees this person with her little boy in the car. And Debbie said, let's ask that lady. So I said, now, you know, you may be a Democrat, but we're giving these out for the election shortly. She looked at it and she said, Billy Shuman. Do you know Billy Shuman? And I said, well, I've just gotten to know Billy Shuman. I'm walking for him today.
And she said she's a Democrat.
And she was a Democrat. And I thought, oh well, anyway. I said, well, do you know Billy Shuman? She said, he is fantastic. She said, he and his wife and children are the perfect family. And I said, well, how do you know them? She said, I taught his child, Sarah Holly. And I said, well, then may I ask you if you'll vote for him? She said, this Democrat will vote for him. Debbie and I thought we did not see one human being in all the hours that we walked. She was the only one that we spoke with, talked with, and she said she would put a sign in her yard and she will spread the word about Billy.
Yes, hello.
We did find that she directed us, and we were just around, you know, but when you're walking in these neighborhoods, and it was a beautiful neighborhood, we enjoyed doing it. Although I almost had a heat stroke. No kidding. I mean, seriously. I went straight home, sat on the sofa just to cool off, and boom, went to sleep immediately. I'm going to ask Roger if he will wait because Mr. Kabrovsky, I had emailed Larry and did not get an answer unless you answered me later, and I missed it. But I wanted Larry because he has fought the good fight, and I can't even go into it. It's the Supreme Court decision that was just recently made about how the South has, to me, been discriminated against because of our voter, you know, we don't want anybody to vote. And, you know, and voter ID, of course, is part of that. We just want to make sure that none of the bad guys vote, which is not at all true. We want everybody to vote. But Larry, would you give us a little update or an interpretation of what the Supreme Court's decision will do for us in the South and what it means to us? And do you feel like you won your battle?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I didn't know if you even saw the email, so that's why you were not on the agenda, but I wanted you to be there.
Thank you. Well, thanks. It's an honor to be here again, and I'm happy to say, you know, we've been talking about this for probably a few years now. And the Supreme Court did give us a total and complete victory on the voting rights issue. It was a 5-4 vote, and I heard Senator Price speak before, and one thing that Lindsey Graham should be held responsible for, as well as immigration and everything else, is he did vote for Sotomayor, made it possible for her to get on the Supreme Court. And of course, she's the nightmare we all found her to be, that she's a racial warrior and is totally on the other side, and he could have helped prevent that. So that's something that should be brought up each and every time his name is mentioned. So we did win a 5-4 victory. And just briefly tell what happened. I mean, nobody could question that in 1965 the Voting Rights Act was necessary because it was the change in evil that actually was, nobody could deny the facts here was that minorities were not allowed to vote and tests were put up, and voting rights changed that. But what has happened now is that almost 50 years later, they didn't change the formula for what states were invokes that, and they had a pre-clearance requirement, so anything in those states had to be approved by the Justice Department. And it was recognized that that was a violation of several things in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, which gives the states rights to hold, their own elections, in Article 4, Section 4, which is the Constitution guarantees to every state a Republican form of government, which means self-government. In 50 years, a lot has changed. Nobody can make a rational argument that the South has changed. And Charleston County was the perfect example of that. The same electorate that voted overwhelmingly for Tim Scott voted for whatever reasons for Obama. People here are not making decisions based on race, but on the person. And I had actually drawn up a lawsuit to do the very thing that the Supreme Court did. And I said, well, once they decide to hear this, I was going to wait for them to make their decision. And what they did is that it's irrational to base it now on facts that existed 40 or 50 years ago. And that's what they held. So what they did is that the formula that existed in 1965 is unconstitutional and makes no sense to apply it now. So there's no pre-clearance requirements, so we regain our self-government again. And this is a huge victory for us because it means that the legislators can make their own decisions and not have unelected bureaucrats at the Justice Department make our electoral decisions. So it was a complete and total victory. And what it revealed, though, about the other side is, I think the most telling examples were Justice Thomas, I thought, was the most brilliant one. He really set things out, and he would have said the whole voting rights thing is unconstitutional as it applies now in the year 2013. On the other side was Justice Ginsburg, and you can tell her view is that the people in the South are somehow inherently evil, and that they should not have self-government, and probably from what she grew up watching, but she gave like anecdotal reasons why you still need the clearance requirement, and it was things that maybe 6 different cases that happened over 25 years, 3,000 miles apart, and that is why the whole South should be deprived of self-government. And she actually brought an example of Charleston County, which Elizabeth would know well, and I know I was on the Charleston County School Board shortly before that. It said in 2003, this is from her dissenting opinion, after African Americans won a majority of the seats on the school board for the first time in history, Charleston County, South Carolina proposed an at-large voting mechanism for the board. The proposal made without consulting any of the African American members of the school board was found to be an exact replica of an earlier voting scheme that a federal court had determined violated the Voting Rights Act. And there's some truth to this, that there was a majority of African Americans, won a majority on the Charleston County School Board, but of course they won that at large by voting the whole county voted for them, which you didn't mention, which is the very reason that we don't need the pre-clearance here. They won fair and square by voting the whole county voting, and there was no Charleston County scheme to undo that. The Charleston County has no power over who's on the school board. That's a legislative matter. So if she had the facts totally wrong on that issue, you wonder about the other 6 things that she gave me. Again, 6 events over 25 years, over 3,000 square miles. It's like she said that if somebody does something wrong in one southern state, that all of us, regardless of what we do, are deprived of self-government. So it's very revealing because there's a 5-4 majority for the time being who believes in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, and what our system of representative government is based on with states. But there's 4 people who would just totally have disregard for that. If the end justifies the means, or the means justifies the end, they would completely ignore the 10th Amendment, Article 4, Section 4, and that the states are meaningless if the view of social justice was impeded. So it was a good decision, but it's a very scary one too, to say that Obama gets to replace a conservative justice that would have been voted the other way. And of course, who knows what's going to happen next time with illegal aliens and the vote and everything else, they could very easily turn against us next time. But this was a complete and utter victory for states' rights and the Constitution that we should be very proud of, and that it's a good thing. So, but I want to thank everybody for working on the Common Core. I have to just mention that it does have some effect. I'm on the State Board of Education, and the people that came were brilliant, and they brought up things and they researched. And I only got on the state school board after they voted to do the Common Core, but they looked at the minutes from when they voted on it, I think in 2010, and some of the members who are strongest for Common Core now and are really the most aggressive were against it. And so by bringing that up and letting everybody know that, it really made them nervous. I saw a nervousness among those who are so stridently supported that didn't exist before. I don't know if we can overturn it, but we need to work on it, because the state board can overturn that at any time. That would be the simplest way to stop it, because they voted for it and they could change it. I'll be there to the end of next year, and then I'll be replaced by Berkeley County's turn. So to represent the seat that I am. So it's not too early to think who would be the strongest conservative from Berkeley County to replace me. And that would be good to start working on the legislators now, as well as the other things. It's not inconceivable, because you mentioned that we're in a Republican majority in the legislature. Every member of the state board is appointed by the state legislature, so there's no reason why we should have a 3-to-1 very liberal majority on that state board of education. It's inexplicable. So hopefully we can change that over time.
How can we change this to where these people are elected, not appointed? Because
that would be a state.
They don't answer to anybody.
Well, that was what I always brought up. There's only one person in that room at every meeting who was elected by the state, the citizens, and by an overwhelming over 100,000 votes, and that's Dr. Zayas.
Yeah, but he has no
say.
power.
It would cause. It's a constitutional issue. Again, it's the state constitution that defines what powers the board of trustees of the State Board of Education have, and what powers the state superintendent. So it would have to be an act of the legislature or a constitutional change, a constitutional amendment to do it. Because as it's set up
It's
now,
just not right for people that are appointed to make such drastic changes to anything in this state.
well, it's set up, I think, because it gives the powers to the legislators to appoint them, and then theoretically they have the power. And not getting into politics, it's the same thing on the aviation authority, that if you can, it's done for the benefit of the legislatures, I think. So it's something that needs to be changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this back on the civil rights thing. What was your reaction to the Attorney General's comment that he'll find another part in that law to continue doing what he was doing?
Well, he's going to try. The scariest thing about that he is clearly a racial warrior. If you look at it, when he went to Columbia Law School, he was a sit-in, overtook the dean's office there, and he's a true believer. He's not going to give up. He's going to look for anything he can. And I was thinking of bringing a lawsuit that wish we could impeach him. He actually, with the whole Trayvon Martin thing, regardless of how you feel about that, there's a part of the Justice Department, it's your tax dollars, that's the Community Relations Department of that. They spent thousands of dollars to organize protests to put pressure on the state to prosecute Zimmerman. So, my point is that the Justice Department shouldn't be inciting racial unrest. That's not their role. So I just found that baffling. That the same thing, the U.S. Department of Education actually has their own Justice Department, or their own, that goes around trying to enforce quotas and discipline and grades and who gets in honors programs or ability grouping. So it's a very scary thing that I think Obama is most revealed in who he appoints to those ideological positions, to the most extreme racial warriors you can imagine in view of social justice, the things that are kind of under the radar screen that really reveals who he is.
So do you think he's going to have any opportunity to?
I think what it does, it buys time, and then it works its way. They hope that by the time those things that he's doing gets to the Supreme Court, they would be able to change who's on there by whether a new person's put on. That's their game plan. It's the same thing with there was also a University of Texas case with racial preferences and getting in schools, and they basically punted that back. They said there was which I blame Justice Kennedy. Justice Thomas would have done away with that and say everybody's treated as an individual. What they said, it needs strict, severe state scrutiny. They put it back to the lower court and said you can only justify this. There's no other way to get diversity, and you have to come up with compelling reasons, and they made it impossible for the, I think, the University of Texas to prove that they are not discriminating by using racial preferences, but the University of Texas is trying to delay and hope that by the time it goes back to the Supreme Court, the makeup of the court is changed. So they could easily change from 5 to 4 the other way, because it is only a one vote victory in how it is now. And that's why the Supreme Court, and get back to Lindsey Graham, he did so much harm, he could have prevented Sotomayor from getting on there. And that needs to be reminded every time it comes up. But thank you. Keep up your work on the Common Core. I think that there's always hope that it can change, because it's truly that the bottom line is it's doing the education what Obamacare did to healthcare. It's nationalizing public education. They did it through the use of grants. They did it through the use of federal tax dollars, through exemptions from No Child Left Behind, which I think that George Bush is the one who introduced No Child Left Behind, which kind of opened the door to what Obama and the President, the U.S. Department of Education is doing. So he really opened the door to it, and they took it 10 steps further. And now they have to be a national, it's like the U.S. Department of Education is like a national school board making decisions for everybody. In Charleston County, it's dysfunctional because it's too big, from basically McClellanville to Edstone, so it's basically doing that on a national scale. So if you need to replace the president, it goes without saying, you need to replace the U.S. Department of Education. I've also looked at a lawsuit to see if I had standing as a member of the State Board of Education to challenge the constitution of these things. And what I found, to be honest, that I probably don't, because the Supreme Court said that everybody who loses a decision would always be challenging the constitutionality of things that the board enacts. So I'm still trying to see if I can pursue that as one way to stop the Common Core and say it's against the law that enacted and enabled the U.S. Department of Education. Clearly it said in there that they can't dictate the curriculum that goes to local school districts. Well, that's what they've done indirectly through the use of the federal money. So I asked them to get involved in the election for the next superintendent of education, because the other side, as bad as it is that Dr. Zake doesn't have the power, if you had somebody there on the other side to go with the majority of board members, at least he is a break. He'd stop the use of the federal money many times. And without him there, it'd just be there'd be no break at all. It'd be unleashed. So he really is the real thing. I know a lot of people think maybe he should just do more in Common Core, but he is bound by law to carry out what the board does. So he has to try to make the best of it. And I don't know any other way to explain it. I think this thing has our tie on it. But keep up all the postcards and everything else. It is making them nervous, because I could observe a palpable change in their attitude. They're a little less talky about it, and a little less, they're very defensive and nervous. So something's changing, so they must be feeling the heat on it and are worried now. So that's a change from being totally self-confident about it and dismissive of it. So thank you very much for all your work on that.
Question for Larry?
I do. Larry, in the most recent correspondence on the meeting today, there was a reference to a survey, and the indication was that all the districts had been surveyed and that they were supportive. And so I asked Barbara Harefield about that, and I asked her to provide me a copy of the survey, and do you have copies of that?
I do not. So she's saying that districts are supportive of...
Well, that's what the correspondence was saying, is that all the districts had been surveyed.
I don't know who they surveyed and what they said, but there's no doubt that the public education establishment, administrators especially, are overwhelmingly enthusiastic for this, because of the money, and they believe that they've totally drank the Kool-Aid on this. I went to the state senate committee to fight in Common Core, and I talked about essentially the same thing as saying now it's like an audible gasp, like I was last minute talking against God when I mentioned what it was doing. So they're totally behind it.
Well, my point to her was that, it was inconceivable to me, and some of you were on the end of my report on my email. It was inconceivable to me that they could implement this without discussing it with the parents, without having community meetings to discuss the implementation of this part of Common Core, all of Common Core.
Well, I agree totally that when they voted in 2010, they voted to outsource what's our responsibility without any evidence that it works, or just taking the word of. I think it also is following money. The Gates Foundation, all these private foundations have put millions and billions of dollars into all these foundations, and there's like a network when a lot of the people on the State Board of Education are state or former county superintendents, and then they go to work for private foundations afterwards, and that's where the money's coming from to do this. And people want jobs, and there's money, and the same people that are promoting this can gain billions of dollars at Common Core after everything is computerized and all the tests, it's all tied together. And it was all through the stimulus money, the race to the top, that is part of this.
So you don't know anything about it?
No, but we have a meeting next Wednesday, and I'll find out.
Could you do that? Would you ask
Yes, sir.
about what survey they used?
I'll turn everything over to you.
Go to the meeting and ask yourself.
Larry, can you just talk about when the meeting is, what time, in case
It's
people want
Wednesday,
to?
it starts at 1 o'clock in Columbia.
Is this Wednesday or
No, this coming Wednesday.
this coming
This coming
Wednesday?
Wednesday. And you can come and speak before the meeting, which I encourage, because even it's good for them to hear. Especially, I thought that the best thing is I would repeat again and pass out the minutes from the meeting of who was against it when they voted for it, because some of those people are still on the board.
Now, Linda Ensore was able to unearth that information.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is great. I didn't know that. I was like shocked, because I still haven't known what change will come. But I encourage everybody to come.
Larry, I'd like to thank you for bringing this lawsuit forward and getting what you did out of it. Thank you.
Well,
very
thank you.
much.
That was, I remember the.
And I know y'all are exhausted, and we still are gonna do our little drawing. Roger?